If I can just get that last stanza back on the screen, it's hard not to think of the woman as we're singing these words. And it changes how we think of the terms scoffers and proud and arrogant. Because if you think of the Old Testament laws God gave to the people of Israel, it was, look, if you have sinned, you need to go to the temple. You need to bring a sacrifice. Now imagine if you were conscious of every sin that you committed. You'd be at that temple, bringing sacrifice over and over again. And the people who thought that they didn't sin so much, they would look at you and say, man, look at that messed up person. They're at the temple all the time. And look how poor they are because of it. Or oh, look how they're struggling. And here in Psalm 123, it's a person who's struggling and saying, Lord, I'm looking for your grace. I'm getting made fun of. I know I'm a sinner. I look for your mercy. It's hard not to think of our passage that we just read, a woman who's a sinner, and then the Pharisees kind of looking at her, scoffing and laughing at her. And so that's the passage we're going to look at this morning, Luke chapter 17, verses 36 and on. Thank you. And I want to begin, beloved brothers and sisters, by asking the question, and I want you to think about it. What does love for Jesus look like? What does love for Jesus look like? How would you answer that? If somebody asked you, well, you're always talking about, I love Jesus or love Jesus, well, tell me, what does that look like? What does love for Jesus look like? Maybe some of you are thinking, well, if you love Jesus, you get dressed up and you're at church every Sunday. Maybe others are thinking, well, no. It's not getting dressed up and going to church, but it's actually just loving people. Or maybe others are thinking, well, I know some people that I think really love Jesus. Like when we're worshiping, their eyes are closed. Maybe you see them raising their hands. You see them kneeling on the floor. And you think, oh, that person is so on fire for Jesus. Maybe others of you think, oh, I'm following this person on Instagram or TikTok. They're always posting great Bible verses. Every once in a while, there's a picture of a Bible open with a journal just filled, and they talk about their devotional time. That person, that one's on fire for Jesus. Now, I'm not, by giving these examples, making any kind of statement about any of those actions. I'm just simply asking the question, as you think about what does love for Jesus look like, how would you answer that? Because that's the question that's being dealt with in this passage. If you know Jesus and if you know God, what does it look like? Well, we're going to end up with this main point. Knowing God's forgiving grace grows your love for Jesus. Knowing God's forgiving grace grows your love for Jesus. But in order to get there, we have to answer a couple questions. The first one is, what does love for Jesus look like? What does love for Jesus look like? It's the first question we're going to answer, and then we'll go and we'll see how does love for Jesus grow, and then finally we'll consider what is Jesus' love. What does love for Jesus look like? Well, you turn to Luke chapter 7. You have a Pharisee who has been hearing about this great rabbi Jesus, and he decides to invite him over for a meal. He invites him over to his house. They come to the table. They recline. In ancient times, it was often that your feet were away from the table. Your body was kind of leaning towards the table, and they're reclining at the table. And then there's this woman who hears that Jesus is at the Pharisee's table, and she goes to the Pharisee's house. Now, back in those days, life was lived publicly. We didn't have walls in the way that we do now. It was an open door. People could wander in, wander out. And so likely in some kind of courtyard or so inside the house, the guests of the host are all sitting, reclining around the table, and people are coming in and going out. Some are standing around the edges. And so this woman takes the opportunity to come inside that courtyard, which isn't completely abnormal. Maybe some would say, well, she's known as a sinner. She shouldn't even be seen. So it might create a little bit of uncomfort. But then she stands behind him at his feet. Remember, the feet are reclining out. And she takes this alabaster flask of ointment, likely has a long neck, and in order to get to the ointment, you kind of break the neck. She kneels at Jesus' feet. Standing behind him, she begins to weep. And it's pretty clear that this weeping is full of tears because Jesus' feet are wet because of it. She cries so much that her tears give Jesus a foot bath. And then she wipes the feet of Jesus with her hair, wipes them dry. All the while, it's not made clear in the ESV, but kissed his feet. It seems like it's not just a quick, but it's just over and over, this continual kissing of his feet. And then breaks open the flask and anoints his feet. Now, Jesus describes what she does as love. If you look at verse 7, or 47, chapter 7, verse 47, he says, "For she loved much." And so, how are we to understand the actions, her actions? Jesus says, here's how I want you to understand him. She's loving a lot. She's showing love. In other words, you want to know what love for me looks like? She's doing it. She's loving me. And we see that contrasted a little bit with the Pharisee because normal cultural behavior would be that if guests come over, you offer them a foot wash, either by yourself or more commonly by some servant or slave. Why? Because walking was dirty, dusty, sometimes even excrement would get on feet. And so just common courtesy, hey, you're going to have a meal with me, let's wash your feet, I'll kiss you. Students would often kiss the hands of their teacher. If you were equals, you would kiss him on the cheek. And then if a guest was honored, you'd offer him oil, refresh the face. Almost like saying, why don't you go into the bathroom and just wash up and get comfortable. And so that's what normal hospitality would do. But what she's doing, Jesus says, is she's showing love, and she's showing it in this almost gushing, over-the-top type of way. A gushing love that makes others feel even a bit uncomfortable. I wonder if you've ever experienced that kind of love. Maybe you've seen it lavished on someone, where a person is just being showered with love, and perhaps you're even sitting there looking back and thinking, I'm not sure they deserve that kind of love. That seems a little over the top. Maybe you've been part of experiencing it yourself. I know my wife and I in the past several weeks have felt overwhelmed by the love that we've received. Knowing the time and the energy that people give and the effort put into it, you think, wow, this is a little bit overwhelming. Not sure I deserve this. It's that kind of a self-forgetful focus on another person. Here, the woman with Jesus, he says, this is great love. So what does love for Jesus look like? The woman is held up as an example of someone with great love for Jesus Christ. Now, Simon the Pharisee, he's clearly uncomfortable by this display of love for a couple reasons. One, he's prejudged the woman. She's a sinner of the city, and she shouldn't be here, and she certainly shouldn't be touching people. He's prejudged the woman based on her reputation of sin. We know who you are. We know what kind of things you do. Why are you here? And why are you actually making this kind of a scene? So he's prejudged the woman, but he also now judges Jesus. He judges Jesus either as clueless, because Jesus doesn't realize how bad this woman is, or reckless. You're letting this bad woman touch you? It's a little too much. And so Simon the Pharisee and the other Pharisees have this understanding of the way that love works. Those who do good, they'll receive good, and they're deserving of love. But those who do bad, they don't deserve any good. And they definitely don't have any right to be near God. Simon's understanding of God's love is not gracious, that says, come to me, anyone, no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, come to me and I will wash you, I will make you clean. I will forgive you, I will give you new life, I will set you up in a secure place. That's the Old Testament teaching of God, but that's not Simon's understanding of God. Simon's understanding of God is, look, if I work hard and serve God rightly, then I should be able to be close to God. And so this woman should not be close. So which one is loving rightly? Well, Jesus makes clear in this passage, it's the woman. She actually understands Jesus, and she understands what love for Jesus looks like. Now, before we go on to where does this love come from, or how do we understand this love, I want to pause and just ask the question, because it can be hard to apply what does love for Jesus look like in our context. We don't have Jesus physically present with us. He's not sitting here in a pew where we might think, oh, I'm going to show my love for Jesus and I'm going to bring some gift. So what does love for Jesus look like now that Jesus is not physically with us? Well, the Bible makes clear that there are two aspects of this. The first is the aspect of worship. Worship. A genuine recognition that though Jesus Christ isn't physically present, His Spirit is with us, and He teaches us that you come and you meet with me as you all gather together. And so there is, even in our day and age, there's this genuine sense that love for Jesus is displayed by a love for the church and being together as church, praising God and rejoicing in Him. But Jesus teaches us that it's more than just that. Love for Jesus is shown in gracious, generous, gushing, genuine love for each other. So if you're trying to understand, okay, what does love look like? What does love for Jesus Christ look like? Well, it's showing the kind of love that the woman is showing to one another. 1 John 4 verse 20 says, anyone who says they love God but does not love his brother or sister does not know God. You can't say that I love Jesus and I love praising Him and I love worshiping Him, but man, there's so many hypocrites and these people just tick me off. That's not love for Jesus, because love for Jesus is displayed in loving each other, showing the kind of love that this woman is showing towards one another. A community that is passionate about worship and focused on Sunday observance, but does it like to be together? They show more of the kind of action that Simon the Pharisee does. A little bit clueless about God's love in Jesus Christ. How does love for Jesus grow? So what does love for Jesus look like? It's this self-forgetful, generous, joyful giving that focuses on God and one another. And how does love for Jesus grow? Well, that's, Jesus says to Simon, Simon, I have something to say to you. Now, the way those words are in the Greek, it makes clear that Jesus isn't saying, hey, Simon, let me tell you something. No, it makes clear that Jesus has something he wants to tell Simon, and it's going to be hard. Simon, I have something to say to you, and you might not like it. You might not want to hear it. You've prejudged this woman who's a sinner. You've prejudged her actions, and you've judged me for how I've related to her, that I've even allowed this. I want to tell you something. Now, I guess we shouldn't miss the point that Simon is thinking these things in his mind. If this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of. And Jesus, knowing his thoughts, answers him out loud. Might be a little bit unsettling as you're sitting there thinking, and then Jesus says, I have something to say to you. And so what does Jesus teach Simon? He gives a very short, simple parable that I think is quite easy to understand. The point of the parable is this: forgiving grace grows love. In other words, love grows as we understand and know forgiving grace. There's two debtors, two people who are in debt. One owes 500 denarii, another 50 denarii. The numbers aren't that important. It's about 2 years' salary and 2 months' salary. So you're going to take your 2 years' salary and 2 months' salary and just imagine what it would feel like to be in those kind of debt. Both are obligated to pay. This is important. There's a relationship between both of them. Both of them are in debt, and both have to pay. Both of them can't pay. They can't make their payment. And what happens? The moneylender forgives both debt. That 2 years' salary that you were trying to figure out, how in the world am I ever going to pay that? Forgiven. That 2 months' salary that you were thinking, how in the world am I ever going to pay that? Forgiven. Completely gone. Don't worry about it. I'm going to eat that cost myself. I'm going to absorb it myself. So, and then the question Jesus asks him after telling this short parable is, now which of them will love him more? In other words, which will respond with greater joy and appreciation and thankfulness to this moneylender? And Simon answers, and it's an obvious answer, the one, I suppose, for whom he canceled the larger debt. If you've ever been under something crushing and then that's been lifted from you, some debt that's been crushing and that's been taken away from you, there's just this incredible joy and freedom. You want to just thank whoever's been involved with setting you free from that. Well, Jesus, he actually uses this parable to describe the human condition between God and themselves. The Bible is very clear that every person is a debtor to God because of sin. God created you and me with this incredible capacity to live holy and righteous lives, to live in perfect love, never to think evil thoughts or do evil things. or say evil things, but always in every way to glorify God and relate to Him rightly and to build others up. But we fail to live up to that perfect expectation that God created us to be. Instead, what is our track record? Our track record is one of constantly thinking of ourselves first, how I feel, how I think. Our track record is one of destroying relationships, of hurting other people, and deeply offending God. And so this sinner woman, she knew that she had an extensive track record of destroying relationships, of hurting others and offending God. And she knew her track record was public. And she probably felt some of the consequences of that sin. Always being whispered about, always being pointed at, always being moved outside of the community. Never feeling like you quite belong. But then what did she see in Jesus? She saw in Jesus Christ the Messiah sent from God, the one that God promised, that began to welcome people like her. And to say, hey, you're not lost forever. You have sinned, and that sin does deserve consequence, but I'm not going to hold that against you. Come to me, I will forgive you. And so the parable that Jesus teaches, it teaches both debt and that relationship of debt with God, but then it also teaches forgiveness. That God doesn't break relationships simply because we sin and can't pay for it. God is a gracious God who pardons debt for all those who come to Him seeking forgiveness. And as you begin to realize how great your debt is, your joy and your love in response to what God has done grows. Forgiving grace grows love. You see, the Pharisee, Simon the Pharisee, and the Pharisees in general did not get this radical grace of God. There's a rabbinic parable in the Babylonian Talmud that says so this is how they understood kind of debt and relationships. A man who is a creditor of two persons, one of them a friend, the other an enemy. Of his friend, he will accept payment little by little, whereas of his enemy, he will exact payment in one sum. So in other words, this is how the Pharisees were thinking, and often how people think. That, you know what, if you're in debt and you're my friend, I'll work with you. You can set up a payment plan, I'll be flexible. But if you're an enemy, no, you got to pay now. Jesus says that's not how God is. God doesn't just simply give His friends better terms for repayment. No, God forgives. And God forgives while we were still enemies. We can never pay it all. That's the point of Jesus' parable. They can't pay it. But the debt is canceled completely. All of your sins of the past, things that you're struggling with, the things that you're afraid you might do one day, all of your sin forgiven completely. And He speaks to Simon the Pharisee. He says, you don't get it, do you? As you're relating with me and as you're relating with the people around your table and as you're relating with this sinner that's walking through the door, you're constantly sitting there analyzing, thinking, okay, who are they? What have they done? What do they deserve? You know, they're pretty good people. I'm going to make an effort. Oh, they're from the people that I don't like. I'm not going to make an effort. Jesus says to him, you don't get it. You don't get it, and that's why you don't understand how this woman can act in this generous, sacrificial, self-forgetful way as she comes to me. She doesn't care about you, Simon. She knows what she's going to get from you. No, she loves greatly because she knows forgiveness. You don't get it, Simon. Why? Because you're lacking even some of the basics. Some of the basics, the foot bath, the kiss, the ointment, and some of these fundamental hospitality basics. I don't care, and even in that culture back then, I don't care if I'm an enemy. These basics are just expected, and you lack even those. The woman was a sinner, and everyone. She herself knew it, the town knew it, God knew it, Jesus knew it, Simon knew it. But instead of being forced to suffer for it, in Jesus, she knew the God who forgives. Beloved, if you've struggled with sin, if you're aware of sin, if you've been guilty or felt overwhelmed by sin, if you felt ostracized or removed because of sin, if you felt like you've been on the outside because of the things that you've done, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. I think it's remarkable that the woman knew who Jesus was, and then what does she do? His feet are enough. She's washing his feet with tears. She's kissing his feet. She's anointing his feet. Why? Because she knew that the steps Jesus was taking on earth meant forgiveness and life eternal for her. Steps that would one day lead him to the cross, where he actually died on the cross, paying our debt for us. Her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. Now, the ESV can make it sound like she's forgiven because she showed all of this love, almost like we have to show a lot of love before we will be forgiven. But the parable makes clear that's not the order of salvation, that there is forgiveness first and then great love. And so a better translation is, her great love proves that her many sins have been forgiven. 1 John 4 verse 19 says, we love because he first loved us. So in other words, if you are struggling to understand what love for Jesus looks like, or if you're struggling to actually care about loving Jesus Christ and other people, how do you pray for that to grow? Well, that love grows by understanding God's forgiveness towards you. It's hard, perhaps, for some of us not to read this and to think, what's the point here that I need to be a greater sinner? Some of us grow up in the church and perhaps have never fell into any great serious sins. And then we see mission work happening, and we see an ex-convict converted, or a prostitute, or drug addicts, and we see their joy and their love for the gospel, and they're in the Word, and they're loving other people, and they just can't stop talking about it. And there's a part of people that we think, oh man, maybe I haven't sinned enough so that I don't know enough about God's love. Is that the point of this parable? Absolutely not. The point of this parable, as Jesus is talking to Simon, isn't saying, look, she's messed up really bad, so that's why she's so happy. You haven't done so much, so that's why you're not so loving. No, the point of this parable is you actually don't get how much you owe God. You actually don't get how deep in debt you really are, Simon. And so the point of the parable is easy. Forgiving grace grows your love for Jesus Christ, but applying it is hard. I mean, do you understand what perfect love really looks like and how far short you fall from that. You might think you're a pretty good person, but you compare that to the words of Scripture, you stare into the mirror of Jesus Christ, and you realize, when was the last time I sacrificed myself for an enemy? I get annoyed when people talk mean to me. You say, well, I'm not going to hang out with them anymore. Like, do we get what real love looks like? And that's the final point, because ultimately forgiving grace grows your love for Jesus. And if you want to understand forgiving grace, you have to look at what real love is and what is Jesus' love. Jesus' love is God's love. The Bible makes clear, it's not clear in this passage yet, but that Jesus Christ is more than just a prophet from God. He is God himself, the Son of God who came to earth. And his love is not conditional. He doesn't come to earth to find the good people and bring them to heaven. No, his love is sacrificial, where he comes for sinners and dies for them so that they might be forgiven. Real love, Jesus' love, God who is love, teaches us that this is love, that Jesus laid down his life for us. And we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. His love is sacrificial to those who do not deserve it. Romans 5, verse 7 through 11, one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die. But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, while we were still enemies of God, Christ died for us. And so the woman, though she knew the law and she knew how messed up she had made her life, and she probably felt deep down in her heart, man, I don't deserve much of anything. There were probably times where she was spat at and she walked and thought, I probably deserve that because I'm a messed up case. But God shows his love in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And so for this woman who's publicly known as a sinner, Jesus' love meant she was forgiven, saved, and accepted and loved. That in this middle of this feast of Pharisee and Jesus and all invited guests, the person who's pointed out as being received in love by God through Jesus Christ is her. And Jesus makes it clear as he speaks to her in front of everyone else. Look, that which you saw in me and the ministry that you came to rejoice in is true. Your sins are forgiven. It's a confirmation of the promise that God makes through Jesus Christ. It's an assurance for her. And it's an assurance that you and I can hear as well. Your sins are forgiven. This is who God is. And so even though she may still have gone through the rest of her life ostracized by Pharisees, she knew that God loved and cared for her freely, graciously, and eternally. That's the love of God in Jesus Christ. But what about Simon? What about Simon? What about you? There's an important part in this parable that we shouldn't miss. Jesus ate with sinners, and he dined with sinners, and he welcomed sinners, and he spoke such beautiful words to this woman who was a sinner. But Jesus also ate with the Pharisees. Jesus also taught the Pharisees. They need him too. And perhaps if we can take this parable, this story, and apply it to us, Jesus speaks to you and to me, and he says, I have something to teach you. And it may be hard for you to hear. It may be very hard for you to hear. That you're not as good as you think you are. That the differences you've created in your mind between yourself and those rebels, or those prostitutes, or those adulterers, or those LGBTQs, or those divorcees, or those blasphemers, or those Sabbath breakers, or those idolaters, those greedy people, those misogynists, those racists. I have something to teach you, and it may be hard. The difference between them and you is not so great. In fact, your judgmental attitude that refuses to love the sinner suggests you may not know God's love in Jesus Christ as well as you think you do. That you may not understand the radical nature of God's grace. And that's, I think, the great beauty in this parable, because there's a temptation among many believers to say, well, I'm going to find people that are just as passionate, and these people around me are Pharisees. Well, Jesus, he's speaking to Pharisees. He's with the Pharisee and he's saying, Simon, I have something to teach you. I'm here to love you as well. Will you hear it? It's not that you have to go and sin in greater fashion. It's that you too have to see your great need for Jesus Christ. It's that you too have to realize and to be set free from this foolish thinking that my love for you is based on how good you perform. No, it's not. It's freely given to all who come to me. Beloved, it's when we get the fullness of God's grace in Jesus Christ that we can then go back to our other points. Well, how does that love for Jesus grow? It grows as I come to understand my own great need. And then I become less bothered about what other people are doing to me or to... No, I begin to realize that I'm as messed up as they are. But there's hope for all of us. And that's what Jesus Christ teaches us. And as we begin to glimpse that hope and feel that hope and experience that hope, boy, does our heart fill with joy and love. And boy, do we want to show to one another that love as best as we can. Why? Because we've known it ourselves. Beloved, may we know God's forgiving grace. And may that forgiving grace grow our love for Jesus. And may our hearts and our lives show that love for Jesus to each other and to whomever God puts on our way, to whomever comes through that door. And may we live in that gracious, generous love to us and through us to the glory of God. Amen.